Hello, welcome to Wild Traxx. Today we have a special guest. I always say special guest, but this guy is really special. Let's say that this is a specialer guest.
A specialer guest? I think that is a made-up word, but we'll go with it.
He is the owner of Ric Allen Creative.
Ric Allen Creative!
Yes, that's right, and which makes sense because his name is Ric Allen, so that was a no-brainer.
Clever.
For him. His award-winning work in sound design can be heard in movie trailers, network TV shows, and major video games.
Major video games!
As opposed to minor video games, which my mind instantly goes to 8-bit sound effects.
Well, absolutely.
His credits include projects for Disney, Sony Pictures, HBO, and the Cartoon Network. And his editing and remixing have earned him gold and platinum records for major labels worldwide. And finally, he is an instructor at the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences. Please welcome our guest, Mr. Ric Allen.
Ric Allen!
Yay!
Hey, how is everybody doing? I wanted to add there's more credits to that. I'm also the person that my wife makes go into the backyard and pick up all the dog poop every day.
Oh, yeah.
And I do clean the studio toilets. So there are there's different levels to my career.
Exactly. So you're a studio owner.
Yeah. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And a janitor.
So you're based in Arizona.
Yes.
So what's the weather like there right now?
It is beautiful. It is short sleeve weather. Sitting out after this interview, I'm going to go out by the pool and sit out there for a while and think about all the things I should be doing in the studio.
All right, this interview's over.
Yeah, because we got snow outside, dude. We're in Detroit, and so yeah, it snowed this week. My kid had 2 different snow days this week. That's how bad it's been.
We got to the point where I was I started my business in New York City back in the 90s when I left employment, getting a paycheck, and it just I haven't looked back. Moved the studio out here 20-some years ago, and I love it. I really do. And it's close enough to LA where I can hop on a flight or drive my truck out, and I'm in LA in 5 hours. So it's kind of a nice little halfway, way to kind of appease the gods on both sides.
So how far are you from Vegas?
About 4 hours.
4 hours. Okay. Because I was thinking about this morning. You and I have done podcasts before. We just never aired them because we shot 3 shows at NAB. This was a couple years back. And we had guests like Rob Noakes was one of our guests, who's a genius in his own right in the sound design world.
Colin Hart, if I remember.
Colin Hart, and
he was telling us about bothering the alligators with subwoofers and getting them to howl and growl.
That's right.
Pretty cool.
And if I remember right, and no, I do remember right, the night before our show, we went out to a Chinese restaurant. And to say it was a sketchy Chinese restaurant would be putting it quite mildly. Actually, we went to a tiki bar. But before we went to the tiki bar, we went to a Chinese restaurant, and we were all sitting around, and somehow the topic of food poisoning got brought up. And I was thinking to myself during the conversation, I've never gotten food poisoning.
Oh, you
Guess what happened
later?
Guess what happened later that evening? Later that evening,
too much kung pao.
Oh, it was too much something. We ended up finding out that both Ric and I got super sick. I mean, I was laid out shaking sick. And we were both so concerned about missing the show because we both were scheduled to do the podcast show the next morning. We were both so concerned about missing the show that we showed up anyways, deathly ill, and pushed through the show.
Wow.
We survived through it, too.
Consummate professionals.
Was that the same Chinese restaurant where the waiter ran into you with the platter of soup?
No, that was the night before.
Okay.
Yeah, the night before, it's a long story. We just walked into
Tell the short version.
Okay. So we were at where were we? We were at a Chinese, no, was this a Chinese restaurant as well?
It was it was a sushi bar.
I need to stop going to Chinese restaurants.
They have other food in Las Vegas.
We walked into a Chinese restaurant. I was on a 2-week trip, and I had 4 locations that I was traveling to in that 2-week trip. So I only had so much clothes to last me for the trip. And this was my first stop. And like the first night out, I walked into the restaurant, and a waiter came by with a tray full of soup and walked right into me. And every bit of the soup just went all over my hoodie. Well, and it was the only hoodie that I had brought to wear. Go ahead.
Was it egg drop or wonton?
It was egg drop, wonton, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little something.
They dropped the egg all over.
And there was egg. Oh, it was disgusting, and I smelled really funny, and so I ended up having to. I think I had to have dry cleaning done at the hotel. But yeah, I was a little not happy when that happened. But that night we determined that both you and I ate the same thing at the Chinese restaurant. That's how we determined what it was.
But you have to admit, not all the stories of you and I interacting have to do with catastrophes. We've had some fun times.
We've had a couple of good times, but mainly it's been catastrophic Chinese stories. Maybe we should just get takeout and call it a day.
There you go.
Yeah, bring the disaster home.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Now, here's the thing. We were not scheduled to do this show today. We were scheduled to do this show a couple weeks ago. And then what ended up happening? You had a back injury, right?
Well, I would love to come up with a story like I was recording tigers at the zoo and I tripped and fell into the tiger pit and hurt my back. But I was putting on socks in the morning. It was one of those things where I have no idea what happened. I bent over to put socks on, and I went to the floor in crippling pain and lived on my living room floor for five days. I did not get up off the floor. And it was one of those where, the sight of my wife pushing me down the hallway on an ottoman with little rollers on it so I can get to the bathroom. It was. I'd much rather be out in the studio and doing that. I was so bummed that I left you guys hanging. I'm glad we were able to do this later on.
Well, Rick, you look good for a 109-year-old man.
That's right. Welcome to the 40-plus club, right?
Yeah. Darn it.
Now, you also, I went to your website, and we noticed that you're using the Make Some Noise slogan. Now, considering that you're slightly older than me, I'm going to assume that you were using it first. Is that right?
It is, yes, and it is amazing because I think it's so appropriate that both of us use it.
Well, it's because we make some noise and we're both named Rick. So there you go.
I think it's a good nomenclature for both of our activities. It works for me. So when I saw you using it, never once did I even think of, I better be that jerk that goes cease and desist. I was like, no, man. More the merrier, the more power. And you've used it better than I have. So,
we started using it. We talked about this on one of our shows. We started using it. When was it? It was back in 2008 or 2009. We were doing video series for Rode microphones, and I didn't know how to close the show. We had like 12 episodes, and at the end of each episode, I was like Will Ferrell in like Talladega Nights. I'm like, I don't know what to do with my hands. I didn't know how to close the show, and so finally I got frustrated. I'm like, Gary, I got to come up with something, and you just yelled out,
"Make some noise!"
Yeah, he said, "Make some noise." I'm like, there you go. All right, make some noise. And then since then,
Gary came up with that.
Yeah, it was Gary. Actually, Gary gets credit for that. Yeah.
Yeah. After visiting Rick Allen's website.
That makes sense. So I guess we ripped it off of you. So it's too late.
Well, if anything, you've done it proud. So I'm more than happy that we associate both of us with that. So
make some noise. So how did you get started in your career?
I actually started in professional audio in the broadcast field when I was 15 years old. It was
they had microphones back then.
Well, they were. I had to hand crank the.
It was the phonograph,
it was
right?
Talkies.
Yeah. Smart Alex.
We're going to be like this the whole show, by the way.
I was about to say I'm not that old, but I am. So no. But it was a small radio station. I grew up in Indianapolis, in Indiana, and about an hour outside of Indianapolis was a city called Danville, Indiana. And they had a tiny little radio station that just signed on. And I was so interested in radio at the time because, faders and knobs and blinking lights. It was like my mom always said I was either going to be a airline pilot or went into what I did because I was always into all the crazy equipment. But I started out just as a morning DJ at 15 from 5 in the morning till noon on Sundays. I didn't have a driver's license. My mother would actually drive me an hour out there, wait, and drive me back. While the girls on the request line were going, "Hey, want to come over to my place afterwards?" It's like, let me ask my mommy. So it was an interesting time of my life. But then from there, I went to, after high school, I worked that radio station through high school and also worked stage crew. and it was in the audio department for a stage crew at our high school that had a very large auditorium, full rigging, everything, very, very nice setup. So I learned some stuff there. Then ended up at Indiana University, and for some reason applied for a job at the local radio station as a DJ. Next thing you know, I'm their production director in charge of all the commercial recording and promotional recording for the AM and the FM. That took me through 4 years. Then I loved singing jingles. Not personally me singing jingles, but I love jingles.
I was going to say, that is a weird thing to love. I love singing jingles.
By Menon.
Yeah, totally geeky. So I ended up, my first job out of college was as a producer at a place called TM Productions in Dallas, which is probably, if you've ever heard back in the day when you heard the radio station sing that, WXYZ, that kind of thing, either that place or another company called Jam probably were the ones to do it. It was for some reason it got localized in Dallas with some great singers. So I was a producer down there. That's where I got my first chops on a 16 track and a 24 track using an API board and the MCI board. So that was like trial by fire getting there. Because until then, I had a TAC 4 track when I was in college, and a small little TAC mixer.
So little cassette recorders, right?
No, these were open reel. I mean, we're talking back in the days of quarter-inch reel-to-reel.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I've evolved and seen technology change immensely, and loved every step of it. So that's a quick how I got started.
So how many Delphonic albums did you spin as a DJ?
Unfortunately, I have to admit that I did work during the disco era in many bars in the college town where I was.
Boy.
Casey and the Sunshine Band.
I did stuff in radio for like maybe a year when I lived in Lakeland, Florida, and was going to school down there. And they had, I remember, CART, they were called, right?
Yes.
That little cassette cartridges. They weren't spinning records then, though. I think they were doing CDs at that point. I think they may have CDs, but everything was on CART. I know the stuff that we were recording.
The CARTs looked like 8 tracks, but they were more high fidelity than that. And so it's interesting because then I ended up, my career took me to, eventually my father got sick, so I left Dallas and went to help the family back in Indianapolis, and then got back into radio there. Then got hired to go to New York City for a station there called Hot 103, Hot 97 was a station there, and that was my
Hot 103.
I was just gonna sing it too. Hot 103. Am I close? No.
Because jokingly, the reason you aren't close is because that was a real transition in broadcast from the musical IDs to the spoken IDs, and sampling had just started. So I ended up buying a Akai 612, I think, sampler, which had full range fidelity for a second and a half. That was how much RAM it could handle, and had these little mini discs that you could put one sample on each side of the disc. So I started
technology.
In sampling.
Wow.
Yeah. And from there, as far as sampling goes, once I got to New York City, working at that radio station, that I got heavy into creating my own sounds. That's where I got into the sound design side, because I was using other people's collections, other people's libraries that you lease, and I kept hearing sounds in my head. As you know, I hear those voices, but these were sounds. So I kept hearing sounds that I couldn't find in libraries, and so I started making them myself. So I started buying synthesizers and started creating that. And the neat thing there was I started getting phone calls, because people happened, back then there was no internet, so people would pass around cassette tapes of different radio stations around the country to listen to see what everybody else was doing. And I would get phone calls going, "Hey, I love the sound in that particular promotional piece. Where'd you get it?" And the answer kept being, "Well, it's one I made." And then suddenly a light bulb went off going, "Hey, maybe I should license these guys." So did that, and then created a library that was sold to radio stations all around the world. And that really took off to the point where I was making more revenue there than I was with my paycheck at the radio station. And after being totally a big chicken, I mean, I'm financially, I want to be secure. I get very scared. And so it was one of those deals where I was just working 16-hour days and barely getting any sleep. And my wife goes, "Hey, it's time to make a decision. And what do you want to do?" And I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and because I loved the ability to just kind of set my own schedule and make silly noises and do what I wanted to do. And I did that starting in around, I think it was 93. And that's all she wrote. And then over time, the business has changed and moved and kind of, I've always had a philosophy of whatever makes me happy. I mean, not selfishly, but whatever's fun for me, whatever makes my creative brain light up. I'm a true believer in that, to chase that, because every time in my life where I've ever chased the money, it hasn't worked. Every time in my life where I've chased what I wanted to do, the revenue came after that. So my interests have kind of drifted a little bit here and there over the years, but it's also diversified my business incredibly. I mean, doing the sound design for trailers, doing music libraries for broadcast, doing sound effects recording. I mean, all those different things, and then getting into, which I do want to talk about later, but getting into teaching has been really fulfilling for me. So I'm able to do all of that, and it's kind of fun. I mean, I've got sitting outside the studio, and I know you do the same kind of thing. I've got two toilets that were thrown away by somebody down in some neighborhood over here. I've got 4 foot by 8 foot double pane glass panels that need to be smashed. My favorite collection was making fun of my wife who drinks rum. I went to different bars and collected the large Bacardi bottles, and I got 300 of them, and then kept telling everybody that she drank all of them.
So she's the reason why all the rum is gone.
Yes. Yeah. Captain Jack Sparrow is always blaming her.
It's Tammy's fault. Yeah.
So I really, really enjoy, and I've seen the same kind of smile in your face when we've talked about things. Being able to have a career, be it hobby level or professional level, being able to do something that you love. It's corny, work at something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. That sort of thing. Because I was the youngest in my family. My sisters are all were either in education or medicine. My mom had a master's degree. So education and socially accepted jobs were always important in my family. And I loved the fact that early on, when I decided I wanted to be in recording and stuff, total support from my family. Just said, the only thing my dad ever said to me is, if you want to do it well. Mm. And so that's always been a driving point for me. It's just, I don't know. I kind of pinch myself. Life has been pretty darn good.
So your training in sound, was it on the job, or is it something you studied at University of Indiana?
No, in fact, the funny story there is I went into the broadcast degree program at IU, and it became so frustrating because some of the professors I had were probably 10 or 15 years out of the business, and were teaching something. I mean, I was in the business at that time, and they were teaching philosophies and workflows that were 10 years old and that weren't up to date. And I got frustrated. So I actually switched over to the business school because I figured if they were 10 years behind and I didn't know what they were teaching, at least I wouldn't know it. I would pay attention. But no, really, it was all, I've depended on mentors and other people's kindness to learn through this process. And I'm still learning. I mean, if I ever stop learning, that's unfortunate. I mean, I've watched Ric's podcasts and that sort of thing, and picked up a million tips. You can learn, from every area nowadays. It's amazing what is just fascinating.
Yeah, you always have to be growing, and you always have to be learning. You'll never know it all. The moment you think you know it all, that's when you're heading down the wrong path. You can only grow if you're continuing to learn.
Is that directed at me?
I'm talking to you specifically right now. Listen, Gary. Ric listens to me. You should listen to me. That's all I'm saying. No,
I don't need to listen to anybody.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I learned right off the bat is there's no end to the trail of knowledge, man. You're just going to always learn. You're always going to grow. So to me, it's just a matter of finding out what everybody else knows and asking as many questions as you can.
Yeah.
What I've always kind of told others is, as long as you don't hurt yourself or hurt your equipment, why not try it? I mean, sound is something that, as long as it sounds the way you want it to, it's correct. I mean, there is no right or wrong way. But I am a big believer in learn the rules so that you then, when you want to break them, you know why you're breaking them. You're not just doing something stupid. You understand the phase relationship of two microphones. But if you want to make them a little bit out of phase, go ahead and do it. But understand why that's happening.
That was directed at you.
Yeah,
Rick.
I know. You've been listening to my stuff. I try not to be out of phase, but thanks, Uncle Rick. No, but it's true. I agree with this. That you have to. I think I even mentioned that in the Sound Effects Bible. Know the rules so you can break the rules. But at the end of the day, it's if it sounds good to you, then it's going to sound good to other people, right. Period. So the best thing that you can do is use your ears. That's my advice for people making sound effects. Duke Ellington said it about jazz. He said, if it sounds good, it is good. And to me, that's my approach with sound design and sound effects.
And we do live in a world, a little bit of social media trolls, where you also then have to have enough confidence where if you believe it's good, go ahead and go with it. Because there's always going to be somebody out there who goes, this sucks, you're bad, you're terrible, you don't know what you're doing. And that used to crush my soul. I mean, I remember when the internet and chat rooms first started, I was in New York City in the #1 radio market in the country, doing really well and going for it. But all of us creatives have a little bit of maybe not all, but a majority of creatives have a little bit of a confidence issue because we're pursuing things. And so on some blogs from somewhere in, I think it was literally Peoria, Illinois. Some person worked at a radio station there and went, Rick Allen's stuff sucks.
Oh, jeez.
I couldn't sleep for days until I finally went, well, who cares? It's like I'm enjoying what I'm doing and I'm making money at what I'm doing. And other people tell me they like what I'm doing, so I can get over this. But it took me, but it was it felt like a hammer in the gut.
Well, that's a good segue because let's talk about the things that do suck. You were learning as you're going. So let's, what kind of mistakes, what kind of things did suck and that you learned from?
Again, it's funny. We talked about phase issues. That's something that I think is a big issue today that I had to learn the hard way early on, which is FM radio, which was, that was the main delivery for music back in the day. It actually, as the signal weakens, the stereo field narrows to keep that static. That way you have a better signal strength to your radio. And so even though you're listening to an FM stereo radio, you can get a close to mono signal sometimes if you're listening in your car or that sort of thing. And so when digital stuff first came out, it was like, woohoo, look, I can pan something far left, far right, and then I can do this and phase this and all that. Hit the mono button, everything goes away because it was all out of phase. Sounded great in raw stereo. So those are some of the things. The technical stuff is learning the different frequencies that people hear and perceive, and not stacking too much stuff on top of each other. I'm trying to think of some equipment failures that have happened. Too numerous to mention.
Let me ask you this. So you worked a lot in radio. How close is working in radio like WKRP in Cincinnati? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, because in my mind, that's exactly what a radio station is like.
Exactly.
Times have drastically changed. When I first started, there were probably 7 or 8 small owners of radio stations in every market. So you had little mom and pop organizations, and they all fought for attention. So that the staff of the radio station, one of their biggest things was to try to get attention from the community and get everybody's, notice them doing something. A lot of times it could be something crazy. Then we got into the consolidation thing in the late 90s, and now we've got just a couple of companies that own every radio station there is. So we've gone from competition for creativity to competition for low cost operation. So that a program director, a boss, the creative guiding person, used to be like WKRP. It was like everything was crazy and nobody knew what was going on and it was okay. But now it's to the point where these creative people, it's difficult to raise your head up out of the trenches, because if you get noticed, you might get let go. It's like, wait, who is that guy? So we've got a lot of people now kind of just keeping their heads down, not wanting to break out of the mold.
Is that
so
why
that has changed?
Is that why you think we don't see too many new national radio celebrities anymore? I mean, because you're thinking about national radio celebrities, they've been around for a long time, and there aren't any really new faces out there anymore.
It's difficult, and I mean it will turn over. But my fear is there is no farm team. I mean, if you can equate it to baseball, it used to be there were hundreds and hundreds of little town radio stations with people learning the trade, making the mistakes there, and learning how to get better and better and better, and moving up in the markets. Doesn't happen as much like that anymore. It's almost like you're either a major market personality or you're stuck in a smaller market. It's difficult. It's a different way to move up.
Given your history in radio, do you do a podcast yourself?
No.
Why not? You need to do a podcast.
I know.
You are a wealth of information. You certainly got the years behind you and a lot of experience to talk about. You should think about doing like a podcast.
I have a hard time making sure that I go out to the mailbox every day and get the mail. It's like,
you're too busy cleaning up the poop in the backyard to do a podcast.
In all seriousness, though, and I'd like to ask, I'd throw this question back on you guys. I have always had an issue with deadlines and finishing things. Even from back in school days, if they gave you a semester to do a book report, I would wait till 2 days before the book report was due to open the book, and then I'd be all frazzled. And then I'd stay up all night and do a great job. It was almost that forced pressure that would make me perform well. Well, that personality has been with me for a long time. I've probably got 15 or 20 projects that are completely finished, edited, but not mastered and metadata tagged. I mean, I've got F-35 jets from 2 years ago, a great collection that I did. I haven't released that yet because it's sitting in a Pro Tools session. Because it's like, I don't want to do metadata today. So that is something where having good interns come in has helped me tremendously. And I learned that from you. Your ability to teach other people through internships was like, wait, okay, I can find some good, solid people and they can help me. So that is helpful quite a bit. But podcast is a perfect example. It's like, yeah, that's been on a notebook as far as, possibilities for years, and I just have never done it.
Well, I think your company name says it all, Ric Allen Creative. And I think being a creative in and of itself, there's this inherent desire to just avoid the deadline.
Yeah, it's a common denominator.
For me, like my books, all three of my books now, it's the deadline that forces me to finish the book. In fact, I got to the point where when I did the third book, I told the publisher, I'm not going to tell you when it's going to get done. I'm just going to give it to you when it's finished. Because if not, I freak out and then I avoid doing it. But if there's no deadline, then all of a sudden it just magically gets done. But That's been, for me, I know that about myself. I know that I avoid it until the very end. So I use the deadline in my favor. I deliberately and purposely paint myself into corners because I know if I'm painting in a corner, okay, well, I got to get it done. And I've just got the kind of personality where I figure out a way to survive.
Well,
I figure out a way to fight my way out of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, and that also spawns creativity.
Oh, absolutely. Nothing will make you more creative than knowing that you're about to fail at something, because then you're like, okay, fight or flight, I got to figure a way out of this problem.
And you don't have a moment to question your choices either. It's like, I got to keep going. So sometimes things that you would talk yourself out of, you let yourself do, and it's the greatest choice. Yeah. I just had lunch with a friend of mine who had worked with Microsoft, and his quote from the other day, it's still in my head, which is, at Microsoft, they told you that if you see someone sitting at their desk staring at the wall, don't bug them. They're working. And that's something that I took to heart, because I almost feel like I have a project finished in my head before I even start it. Because I go through so many scenarios within my head on how to do it best and how to do this. And so I mentally do the work before I physically do the work a lot of times, and that helps.
Well, that reminds me of a story, because back in, I think it was the 90s, when SNL was just kind of making that comeback after the Eddie Murphy days. They had that lull there at the end that nobody watched, and then they brought in that new batch, and there was this writer that had been there since the 70s, and a lot of the writers were complaining that he doesn't do anything. And, he would, every once in a while he'd submit a sketch, but he wasn't really into it. And one day, one of the writers was walking by his office, and he was just sitting there staring at the ceiling. And so he went and complained to a producer. And the producer said, "He's doing what?" He said, "He's just sitting in his office, just staring at the ceiling." He goes, "Leave him alone. Leave him alone. He's about to come out with gold."
Yep.
And he did. He did,
It's amazing. Creativity is hard to manage from a logical management left brain side. And one of the things when I had the company was really, we were probably on over 1,500 radio stations with a library that was updated monthly. And my studio manager that worked here, I hired him as an intern. He became my studio manager, and easier times with the money flowing. But our weekday literally was, he would come to the studio at 12 o'clock. We'd immediately go to lunch. It was a company lunch every day. We'd get back at 2 o'clock. We'd work till 6, and we took Thursdays off. So 15, 16 hours of work a week, and this guy was, making really good bank, and I never had a problem with it because what I told him in the beginning was, we will work as minimum hours as we can as long as everything gets done exceptionally well. As soon as anything doesn't get done and doesn't live up to that, then we're going to have to talk about it.
Right.
But until then, this is going to be an incredibly fun place to work, and that's and that makes for better creativity in the people that I was hanging with.
And I also think with creatives, I think that as creatives, we are inherently lazy. We are inherently lazy people, and which is why we paint ourselves in corners and then produce.
Well, I don't know how much of it is laziness.
Yeah, there's a better way to phrase that, because I agree with you. One of the biggest fear I have, and I was talking to Tammy about this the other day. I was like, sometimes I just feel like I'm being lazy, but then I realized, nah, I'm working smarter, not harder.
Yeah, you're percolating.
Percolating is a way to put. That's what I was going to say. I don't look at it as being laziness, because I found I don't look at it as laziness because in between like the Chop Shop seasons, like we did 6 seasons, and I would do a season, and then for like 2 months I would do like nothing but like piddle around, the studio. I'd tinker with a little of this and a little of that, and it used to drive me nuts because I try to be focused and I try to be driven, and I would go through these these spells where I'd be like nothing was happening, and then I realized I'm percolating. It's just because my mind is waiting for the next cool thing to kind of entice me and lure me in. And then sure enough, something would pop up like Zombie Apocalypse, which is the library we did for season 3 of the Chop Shop. And that really was that was a 90-degree turn for the Chop Shop. And we really kind of picked up our stride after that. But that whole thing happened because I was on my way to the gym, and I saw a bumper sticker at the back of a car talking about the Zombie Apocalypse. And it was just like a light bulb. I'm like, oh, that's it. And then instantly within a day, I was off to the races. And then I just started a 6-month project, all because I saw that one thing. And so for me, I've learned to it's a balancing act of, all right, I'm doing nothing today, but at the same time, I'm kind of doing something. And then you just kind of wait for, inspiration to hit, and then boom, you're off to the races. Okay.
That totally makes sense on my side. Yeah. I agree. I'm always jealous of the people that can go into a studio and they've got, 1,000 edits to make, and they sit down and they bang through those 1,000 edits, and at 800 edits, I'm the guy that goes, "You want to go to lunch? You want to go to lunch?" And they go, "No, I'm going to finish this." It's like, wow.
See, I can't leave anything on my plate. Almost to a fault. So if I got like 1,000, cuts I got to go through in a day, I don't care if I got to stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning. I am not going to leave with like 100 left to do at the end of the day. I have to push my way through it. So it's really hard for me to walk away from anything and go, I'll do the rest of it tomorrow. I would rather burn through a whole day and go into the night and get it done than to know that if I have to wake up the next day, I got to, finish something I started.
Yeah, I agree.
So you've worked in music. So you've worked on projects that have been platinum and gold, right? So can I ask what musicians?
I've got a platinum record for Phil Collins, for Matchbox 20.
Whoa, go back to Phil Collins. What did you do? Come on, talk to me.
The funny thing there, the Phil Collins is so old that it actually has a platinum cassette along with the CD in the picture.
Was it Susu Studio?
It was both sides now.
Oh,
nice. and I don't want to take credit away from anybody who did massive work on those projects. A lot of the platinum records that I've got are just either dance mixes or radio edits, so shortening songs, things like that. So yeah, I never had the pleasure of meeting Phil during that project, or that sort of thing. But and then over here in the corner, I have a platinum record of Two Live Crew. Me So Horny. That's just to remind me that, I've worked on a...
That is going to be your ringtone now. I am going to change your ringtone to, Me So Horny.
Well, you're welcome. I bought that tape, so, you're welcome.
Well, yeah, and you can't sell yourself short by saying you just did the radio cuts, because at the end of the day, that's the stuff that everybody ended up listening to was the radio cuts.
Exactly.
And this is something that I've struggled with throughout my career, and that is that insecurity is, I totally consider myself nobody special. I love what I do. I'm privileged to be able to earn a living doing what I love to do. But, it's like, but then all of a sudden, sometimes I look at my resume, or it's like when you were rattling off the stuff at the top of the show, some of my credits, I'm like going, wow, I'd like to be that dude. Yeah. It's like, that guy sounds like he's done some stuff, man.
I think you have to be humble. I think if you're not questioning your ego, then you should be questioning your ego. I think that's part of the creative process. And you remember this because you were around when this happened.
Don't you point at me.
I'm pointing at you, mister. When the Sound Effects Bible first came out, I went into a cave, if you remember, for like the first 6 months to a year, because I was petrified of the haters. I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody's going to call me out and tell me I'm a hack and this, that, and the other. And it's true. I stayed off of, there wasn't a lot of social, it was chat groups, chat rooms back then, because there wasn't really social media. But I was freaked out. I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody's going to tell me I'm a hack and that I don't know what I'm doing. And then finally, the turning point was I got a call from, I don't want to say who it was, but I got a call from a gal who's a very famous Foley artist. And she was like, where did you learn how to do all this stuff? And I'm like, oh boy, here it goes. I'm getting called out. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I just kind of, I'm in Detroit. There's really nobody around here to teach me. So I just kind of figured most of the stuff out on my own. She goes, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah, why? She's like, well, my husband, who happened to be an Academy Award winner, he uses your book and teaches with it at the school and this, that, and the other. And, and we ended up developing a relationship. And that was at that moment I was like, oh, maybe I'm not a hack. And then I kind of got a little bit loose with it. But even still, when the Location Sound Bible came out, I'm like, I kept telling myself, who am I to write the book and call it the Location Sound Bible? But, every now and then
You're a minor celebrity.
I'm a minor celebrity. No, but every now and then someone will shoot me a message and say, hey, we really appreciate your book and it's helped us out a lot and it feels great. But to me, every time I do something, I question what I'm doing. And I think that's a healthy part of the process.
I have read, before I had a chance to meet you, the Sound Bible was something that had dog-eared folds in it that I had read and underlined things. And
this is wrong and this is wrong. No. I could do this better. No.
This guy's an idiot.
You took the time to share some incredibly important knowledge that, even if you're the most seasoned pro, it's always great to be reminded of some practices and some reasons why we're doing things. And that's what that book did for me incredibly. It was a good knock upside the head to make sure I was doing things well. It helped. I'll tell you this, no BS. It made me a better sound person.
Here's the truth. The real reason why I wrote the Sound Effects Bible wasn't because I thought I was the guy to write the book. It was because for 10 years, I tried to find a book on sound effects.
There's nothing out there
to help me, because I still would, and I still am to this day, want to learn more on how to do it. But I was always looking at bookstores and all that kind of stuff in libraries for a book on sound effects, and I never could find anything. And then finally, after about 10 years, I got frustrated, and I was like, you know what? Forget it. If no one else is going to start sharing the knowledge, I'll do it myself. And I contacted a publisher, and boom, I got the book deal. But I wrote the book out of frustration because nobody had written a book on sound effects. And so I'm like, all right, well, here, we'll start here. And then, if anybody has something to add to the conversation, they can write a book themselves. And that was the whole reason why.
And now there are books for everything, it seems.
The trouble I'm finding, and see if you guys agree with this, and I'll say this, hyping your podcast, is YouTube and the internet has gotten so crowded with people telling you how to do it, and the quality of those people it's hard to vet them. It's hard to find out if they know what they're talking about or not.
Right.
So that's why Detroit Chop Chop and that whole series and everything was so fun to find because I knew what your quality level would be. So I could spend time watching that and it wasn't wasted time. But how many times have we gone online to look for a tutorial video for a new piece of software or something? And it's 7 or 8 deep before you find one that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's, or that is even right. And so that's something as far as vetting the education these days is harder when you do it online. Because you don't know, they'll look you straight in the eye in these tutorials and tell you things that aren't always a good method to do things. But somebody who doesn't know better, who's just learning, is going to believe that. So it can corrupt the quality of the sounds we're going to get with future recordists. That scares me a little bit, and that's why I'm so glad you're taking the time to do the stuff you're doing.
So you did sounds for Grand Theft Auto 5.
That was and that was an interesting transition into recording my own large sound effects, which was up until that point was synth based. I've got a Moog modular system. I've got way too many toys.
I got to jump in. So speaking of synth based stuff, I've been meaning to ask you this. So you were one of the beta testers for the Sinclair?
Yes.
I got to hear about that. I have never used a Sinclair. I've always wanted to, but Sinclair is the device that Gary Rydstrom most famously, I guess, it's known for. He created these Jurassic Park, dinosaur sounds and stuff off of the Sinclair. But it was a 16-bit, if I remember correctly, 16-bit recorder.
32 voices. And it was the Sinclair and the I think it was called the Post Pro version of it too, which was a hard disk recorder back in the day when that just wasn't possible. I mean, it was a group called New England Digital out of up by Dartmouth, if I remember right. Great guys, very scientific, and they created a really awesome piece that the facility I was working for at that point. We beta tested. We got a discount on it, but those retail price on those things at that time were probably around $300,000.
Holy smokes!
And it's interesting because the gentleman who created that system, it's out on an app for the iPad now.
Really? So for $9.99, you too can have a Sinclair.
I think it's like $25, but the Sinclair was incredible, and I honestly have to look you in the eye and say, I don't know if I ever really learned it because it was so incredibly deep. What you could do with it, you could keep learning that forever and ever and ever and ever. So it was a neat experience, but it was not a super intuitive thing. Their New York headquarters was right across from the Winter Garden Theater on Broadway, where Cats used to be. So I used to go up there on my lunch break to sit in with some of the guys that really knew how to use it. And I'd come back to work with a headache because it was just like, I just spent an hour and I remember about 2 minutes of what they did because it was just like, it's like, wow. So but that was fascinating.
It wasn't plug and play. That's what you're saying.
No, it was not.
No, this is before anything was plugged other than, this was way back in the day. When did that come out though? That was early 90s? Boy,
the years just blur together. So I
think it was early 90s when it came out. I went to Full Sail in 95, and they had one, if I remember. They have a half dozen of them somewhere in storage now because nobody uses them. But it's always been a fantasy of mine to track one down and just to play with it because I'm betting you could still make some really cool stuff with it.
I'd be fascinated to find out if you sat me down in front of it and said, go for it, if I would even remember anything. I'd love to do that. It'd be fun. And it's funny because, do you guys remember the Fairlight, which was kind of the other version of the Sinclair?
Yeah. Yep.
And I now have a friend who, he was an engineer in LA, that actually recorded a lot of the stock sounds for the Fairlight. So he's got, I think, 4 Fairlights in his garage here in town, and I keep trying to talk him into firing one up so we can play with it.
Yeah, he needs to give you one. Do you really need to have 4 in your garage? You can have 3 in your garage and give one to Rick, right?
Yeah, I like that.
So go back to Grand Theft Auto. So what did you create for Grand Theft Auto? Yeah, no worries.
So what got me involved in that? And it was, it's one of those situations where your involvement with a lot of these projects go incredibly based on networking and who you know and who you've worked with and if they like you and that sort of thing. And I had been asked by Sample Logic, who does a lot of contact instruments for Native Instruments contact sampler, years before Grand Theft Auto came out, and they asked me if I wanted to do the sounds for a new cinematic sound design instrument they were putting out, and I said heck yes. So I then decided and realized that I needed explosions, and this is going to be a long story, sorry. I needed to get my own, because I couldn't license sound effects that other people did to use in something that was going to be re-released in pieces. I needed to be original material. So, boy, this just opens up a long story. Gary,
go for it. We still have coffee left in our mug.
I've got one question regarding this before you get into it more. Was one of the sounds of a guy beating up a hooker?
No.
So you're not credited with that one.
Okay, all right.
You know what? Let's not even talk about Grand Theft Auto. Let's go on to the next question, because that's really where we were going with that.
It might have been an uncredited role. I'm not sure. But no. In fact, Gary, you were asking about things that went wrong. You know, like stories about that. My first recording of automatic weapon fire and large ammunition, that sort of thing. That was a total sad story. I went out to the desert, spent hours with an armorer shooting things, and it just, with your headphones, you're hearing the impacts and things and you've done this before, and I know you know this. It sounds great because you're getting the actual sounds into your ears as well as the headphone sound. So I thought I was recording the best sounds you've ever heard in your life. Got him back to the studio.
Crack, 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 crack.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm crying.
Yep.
And that is when social media and friendship and nice people and mentors came into very important. It became something that changed my life, which is I swallowed my pride and fear and messaged Frank. It's Bree, right? I always want to say Frank, the recordist. And I sent him a message and going, here's what I did. What did I do wrong? Because I know you're the best at this.
Yeah, he's the guy to call.
Most gracious person in the world went, hey, Rick, what do you got? Okay, here you go. Try this, do it, try it. And next time I went back out, it changed. It was like, okay, now I understand the concept of it. So then I could start moving microphones around and do that. So that's a story. That was a major disappointment meltdown that turned into a very good story with Frank being so nice.
If I could stop you there, could you maybe help the audience out and tell them what exactly did he tell you to do?
Well, you have to, if you think about gunshots, very similar to miking a drum kit,
like a snare hit, right?
Yeah, because what you have is a very high transient and then a very soft follow through. And so that's what we were hearing when we brought it back. We were just capturing a big transient and nothing else. Well, our ears react very differently than a diaphragm on a microphone. They're different reactions in processing the sound. What we hear in gunshots, especially in Hollywood gunshots, is that after sound, that crack in the beginning, but then that. Now we're into making mouth noises. This is gonna be fun. So it's very important to have that amplified, which you can do if you're stuck with just one thing. Limiting helps there because it'll bring the main transient down and keep the after sound up. Or you can use multiple microphones. You can get a microphone close that can handle just like a snare that has a super high sound pressure level and also a high transient. You use a dynamic microphone close to that to get the high end. Then use some shotgun directional mics like overheads. In fact, you can actually point them away because that way it gets that reflection off the hills, which is an important part of a lot of those sounds. So I it's not necessary, but I end up usually tracking probably 14 mics when I do a gun session or an explosion session. And that being to protect myself against digital overload on some tracks if it happens. I've got safety measures and different sounds, and then can mix them all back together when you're mastering the sounds. So that now, and I did the same thing with explosions, which I'm going on record. I probably am on every NSA watch list, because for months I was on the phone going, yeah, we're gonna be blowing stuff up on Saturday. You cool for that? And then it's like, uh-oh. It's for the movies. It's like, it's for video
P.S.
games.
I love America.
Yeah,
exactly.
You're definitely on the list.
Yeah.
Well, I'm probably on a list for other reasons too, but I'm not going to get into that. No.
Well, I just wanted to add, one of the things that, because when I would do guns and explosions, things like that, I always did multi-tracking, usually around 16 tracks, because I'd have like 2 8-track recorders or whatever. But I always had like my go-to, like 8 to 12 positions I always use. And then I would always have like 3 or 4 mics that I'd be like, all right, this time I'm going to try this. And I would try something super experimental, knowing that I don't have to use it because I've got my base dozen or so mics that I know I'm going to go to anyways. But I figured since I had a couple of extra tracks left over, why not experiment? So every time I did a session, from the very first session on, I've always added a couple of mics that were in super weird spots. Sometimes they would work, sometimes they wouldn't. But to me, it was like always trying to figure out a new way to try to capture that cool sound.
And that's a great. I need to adapt that suggestion, because that's a great suggestion.
If you're doing 14 tracks, bring a couple extra mics and then make it a 16 track, and then you put them closer to the sound source. You point them away from the sound source. Different styles of mics, or maybe a contact mic. I've never really done contact mics on guns, but I know some guys that have. Yes.
I am addicted to contact mics these days.
Really?
Mainly for not necessarily for gunshots as much as I'm using them a lot for metal slams and that sort of things. When you excuse me, when you're out in the field, and you can't isolate something entirely. I found a construction dumpster that it looked like it was 2 stories high and as big as a football field. I'm sure it wasn't, but it was about 500 feet from a light traffic road. So I could get takes in between traffic to some point. But when I put a contact mic onto that, in addition to a couple of shotguns and like a Sennheiser 8040 in a good position, I found that the contact mic itself sounded great. Sounded like you were there with no air, with no interruption in the environment. I was amazed. Good contact mic. It's also fun to get the cheap little disc contact mics and do that, but their impedance is different usually than most preamps, so it doesn't pass the full frequency realm of that. I've had good luck with AKG has one, and Barkus Berry has another that they're a little more pricey, but I've used them all the time. I really do love that. So yeah, no, contact mics. I'm a big fan of that for sound design. Things can go on and be noisy, and you can still capture stuff. Which let's get back to recording explosions. But first of all, let me say this warning to the federal government.
I love America.
I do love America. But have you guys heard of tannerite? Tannerite is considered a exploding target. It's a plastic explosive. Yeah, and I can walk into any store here, any gun store here in Arizona, and buy pounds of it. It is the scariest thing. I should not be allowed to have it.
Actually, you know what? I didn't know that that's what it was called, but we have used that stuff before. When we did guns for Zombie Apocalypse, we used that stuff, the exploding targets. Yeah.
When a bullet hits it, it explodes. Yeah. So that always fascinated me, that I as a non-competent idiot can walk in and buy that. It's like, okay. And I've luckily worked with, when I do these kind of projects, I've found some people that are friends of mine that have been in the armed forces that are smart, and that's why I have all my fingers still.
There you go.
How volatile is that stuff?
It will not. I'm watching Mythbusters because I'm always curious on that. It will not. I mean, you could have it. It's first of all, it's 2 powders. You mix it together for it to become active.
Okay.
Then it has to have a large force impact. In fact, they put it in the back of a car, saying, "Well, if it's mixed together, would a rear end collision blow up the car?"
Right.
It wouldn't. It takes a bullet, and that's why I ended up getting a suppressor for my AR-15 was because I wanted to make sure. In fact, this was Frank's idea.
You're definitely on the list.
Yeah. I just want to say that I have no affiliation with Ric Allen, just in case anybody's listening to.
Yeah.
I just met this guy.
And the scary thing is, I haven't had guns for most of my entire life, and all of a sudden now it looks like, talk about zombie apocalypse. It's like, I'm ready. We stuffed a pound of this into about a half a pound into a watermelon, and you'll see there's some video of the watermelon blowing up, and things like that have just been hilarious. So that kind of forced me into doing the design for Sample Logic and an instrument called Assault, and that's what kind of forced me into and got me interested in the explosives and ammunition recording and that sort of thing. And that instrument I got in the hands of a friend of mine named Brian Apple, who at the time was overseas working for Rockstar, and he had actually. This is how the mentoring people and being nice to people, I think, is so important. Brian, when I was in New York City, he was in Hartford, Connecticut, working there, and asked if he could come and visit and just sit in. And he became a good friend of mine. And I've over the years I've learned more from him than I taught him, I'm sure. But he got a hold of my instrument and used that to put a lot of sounds into the parts of Grand Theft Auto 5 that he was working on. Which is kind of cool. So that's how I ended up in that game. And helping people, it just leads to so much. The way I got into all the Disney games that I've been involved in was I got a call from somebody who said, "Hey, Rick, there's a woman who is a country singer and in my church and wanted to know if she could come over and try out some of your mics before she goes to the store and buys one. Or buys one online, whatever." And I said, heck yeah, send her over. So she came over with her husband, and her husband happened to be one of the creative directors at an agency that did a lot of the Disney games. And we're talking while she's singing and testing mics, and he goes, "Oh, so you do noises and sound design and stuff?" And because I think I was wearing a Rax Make Some Noise T-shirt, and he goes, "Do you want to take a shot at the next game that we do?" And I went, "I'd love to." And the next game was a Disney Cruise Line game. He said, "Go for it." And that game took like 4 or 5 national awards.
Wow.
Which is funny because then suddenly I went from not ever doing a game to suddenly it was like, oh, he must know what he's doing. We got an award. So all of a sudden I started doing a bunch of games, which was, but that all came from just trying to help somebody out.
Yeah.
So the karma does roll around.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in karma, and
you are not.
Yes, I am. Don't you tell me I'm not. Actually, this is probably a good place to end this show, but we will be back for part 2 with award-winning sound designer
Ric Allen.
We'll talk a little bit more about sound design, making noise, and of course your work with the Conservatory Arts for Recording Sciences. So we will be back. Until next time. Make some noise. Actually, do you want to say it? You should probably say it. Go ahead.
Make some noise.
Make some noise.
Is that it?
That's it.
Where's my check?
You're not getting paid.